The unicorn of today is quite different from the ancient and medieval unicorn dating back to at least 400 BC. The unicorn has become less enigmatic and increasingly bound in ideals of nostalgia, girlhood, innocence, and fantasy. Picture popular contemporary unicorns like Twilight Sparkle, the purple unicorn pony from the ongoing children's television show My Little Pony, the majestic titular unicorn from the 1982 film The Last Unicorn, Lady Rainicorn, the colorful flying unicorn from Cartoon Network's Adventure Time, and the plethora of Lisa Frank-inspired rainbow unicorns that feature in our 21st century emoji lexicon, as well as countless children's coloring books, toys, and food products. It's somewhat surprising that these modern representations were born of darker unicorn mythos from the Middle Ages, which characterized unicorns as strong, ferocious beasts hunted for their magical powers. Medieval unicorn tales were notoriously ones of capture, destruction, and exploitation. However, these tales were not all bleak and hopeless. Inasmuch as the medieval unicorn mythos was wrought with violence, it was also tinged with beauty. Beauty brought forth from the archetypal virgin maiden, alluring and virtuous, who would enchant the ferocious unicorn. She, the virgin maiden, was the only one who could tame it. In this video essay, I will explore the history of the unicorn mythos from medieval texts and art to modern representations in literature and film through an eco-feminist lens, which posits that women and nature, which includes animals, are inherently connected in that they both provide a source of life and nurturance that become exploited, degraded, and oppressed by the patriarchy. My research is guided by this thesis: that the unicorn mythos has evolved from the Middle Ages to now to imagine unicorns and women as fierce counterparts, gods of a wilderness once, but no longer, stripped of its divine magical powers by patriarchal violence. So, when it comes to unicorns, where did we come from and where are we going? As aforementioned, unicorns are first introduced circa 400 BC in the book Indica, an ancient Persian text. In the text, unicorns have white bodies, heads that are dark red, and eyes dark blue. The sharpest point of their horn is a vivid crimson, an image that evokes bloody violence. Unicorns were fierce and powerful. They cannot be taken alive. Ctesias, a Greek physician, also wrote about unicorns in the 4th century. They fight with thrusts of horn, he says. They kick, bite, and strike with wounding force both horses and hunters. Another Roman writer describes the unicorn's miraculous properties. Anyone who drinks from the unicorn's horn is protected against diseases, convulsions, and poisoning. The abbess Hildegard von Bingen believed that unicorn liver cured leprosy, and that unicorn hide worn over the skin protected from pestilence, like the plague and fevers. The unicorn, then, was a symbol of wisdom too, miraculous and magical. The unicorn was also considered a biblical creature. While some scholars argue that the Hebrew word re'im translates to wild ox, it has remained associated with the monoceros or unicorn for many centuries. Margaret B. Freeman, in her sprawling book The Unicorn Tapestries, explains, "There is power, majesty, and exaltation in the unicorn of the Old Testament. In the book of Numbers, chapter 23, verse 22, God is said to have the strength of a unicorn. Similarly, in the New Testament, the unicorn becomes a symbol of Christ and the Incarnation, with the alicorn, the unicorn's horn, denoting Christ's cross." Because of their religious symbolism, unicorns were featured substantially in Christian psalters from the Middle Ages. In Queen Mary's Psalter from the early 14th century, unicorns wait patiently with a host of other creatures to board Noah's Ark. In an illustration from a Dutch Bible circa 1440, the unicorn is first to be named by Adam. A miniature by the 15th century encyclopedist Bartholomeus Anglicus shows the unicorn among other creatures witnessing the joining together of Adam and Eve by God in the Garden of Eden. Fittingly, the unicorn became a symbol of lovers and marriage. The ancient Latin physiologist circa 900, however, published centuries earlier, and the inspiration for many medieval bestiaries, which were, in effect, encyclopedias of animals which included allegories for religious instruction, offers the most illuminating description and portrayal of the unicorn. According to this text, the unicorn was a small animal, like a kid, but exceedingly fierce, closely mirroring Christ, humble and meek, but magnificently powerful as the Son of God. The physiologist also first sees the unicorn lured and enchanted by the archetypal virgin maiden, taken captive by hunters, and exhibited in the king's palace. These events, which will become central to the medieval unicorn mythos, are believed to represent the incarnation, or Christ descending into the womb of the Virgin Maiden, Virgin Mary, and adopting human flesh. The maiden becomes a more pivotal figure in unicorn mythos when she is written into medieval poet Philippe d'Étampes' Physiologus from the 12th century. In the unicorn bestiary from this physiologist, the Virgin Maiden lingers in the forest, breast uncovered, waiting to ensnare the beast. Lured by her scent, the unicorn kisses the virgin's breast, slumbers in her lap, and is killed by hunters in its sleep. The unicorn mythos bifurcates during the 13th century, when romantic poets and writers of the Middle Ages imbued the unicorn with chivalry, loyalty, and a lover's devotion. In this secular version of the mythos, the maiden is, and can be, any young girl or woman who is chaste or generally pure of heart. From then on, the unicorn, once captured, will sometimes be chained or confined within domestic spaces, a symbol of his complete subjection to her, the maiden's will. Since the 4th century, the unicorn mythos has become unmistakably gendered. In the Book of Indica, the unicorn was seemingly sexless. The Virgin Maiden was absent from early depictions of the unicorn hunt. Instead, bands of huntsmen corner unicorn offspring, forcing the parents to come to their rescue, a death trap. The Middle Ages saw the unicorn as decidedly masculine, insofar as the creature was distinct from the Virgin Maiden who heralded its destruction. In a culture where subjugation of and violence against women was and still is the norm, unicorn mythos in which the male-coded unicorn is desecrated and exploited is decidedly unusual. So, how exactly did unicorn mythos reflect or reimagine ideas about gender in the Middle Ages? Sherry B. Ortner, in her article, As Female to Male as Nature is to Culture, describes the inherent dichotomy between male and female and nature and culture. Culture, Ortner argues, is the process by which humanity transcends the givens of natural existence, bends them to its purposes, and controls them in its interests. Culture is essentially man transforming, dominating, usurping, and overcoming nature. This idea was, unsurprisingly, upheld by conservative churchmen and philosophers of the Middle Ages. The church repudiated pagan attitudes that supported an uncanny affinity among humans and non-human animals, and Pope Gregory the Great declared that man is indeed by nature lord over brute animals, and that men ought to be feared by animals. But what is this to do with sex? And better yet, what is this to do with unicorns? Ortner explains that women are seen as closer to nature and animals because of their reproductive and domestic roles, while men, through culture, consciousness, ideas, and technologies, create relatively lasting, eternal, and transcendent objects. Women create only perishables, human beings. Women are like nature, therefore, in that both provide a source of life and nurturance that become exploited, degraded, and oppressed by the patriarchy. In the Middle Ages, the dichotomy between male and female in nature and culture is made no more relevant to the topic of unicorn mythos than in the nature of medieval stag hunts, which serve as the basis for, arguably, the most famous historical depiction of the unicorn and the unicorn hunt. While in Celtic Europe stags were naturally associated with the horned god Cernunnos, the so-called Lord of the Forest, and revered therefore by hunters, the stag of the Middle Ages was property of the king and his royal forest. The widespread enforcement of forest laws across Europe, especially after the conquest of 1066 by Duke William of Normandy, oversaw the privatization of the natural world, including forests and wild game. During this time, wilderness itself seemed to gradually disappear under the oppressive hand of kingship, which saw that animals, even wild forest dwellers, were the private property of wealthy landowners and the king. The domination of life and usurpation of wilderness were, and are, patriarchal activities, insofar as they inspired subjugation, domestication, and domination of the woman or animal other. It is fitting, then, that the first 4 tapestries in the famous Unicorn Tapestries, a series of 7 tapestries created between 1495 and 1505 that depict the mythos of the medieval unicorn hunt in stages, as stag hunts often were, are dominated by richly clad male hunters. Women were, of course, naturally excluded from these hunts, and their tall, lithe hunting dogs, a mimesis of the traditional medieval stag hunt. In the second tapestry, known as the Unicorn at the Fountain, the unicorn's majesty is undermined by his position in the scene. Lowly and near the bottom of the tapestry, flanked by stiff, upright hunters with sharp, erect spears. The scene is an amalgamation of nature and culture, with culture predominating and surveilling nature, which includes the unicorn and the forest animals he attracts by purifying the stream water of serpent venom, making it safe for the other animals to drink. In the subsequent tapestries, the unicorn is attacked, defends itself. In the fourth tapestry, the unicorn is seen impaling a hunting dog, is captured by the Virgin Maiden, whose countenance in the fifth tapestry, despite her archetypal traits of innocence and virtue, denotes slyness and treachery, and is killed and brought to the castle. The hunt and capture of the unicorn in the tapestries, according to Freeman, can be interpreted as the whole divine plan for man's redemption: Christ's incarnation through his birth to the Virgin Mary, the pursuit of him by his enemies, and his death on the cross. Despite the fact that this interpretation of the unicorn tapestry sees the maiden as a representation of the Virgin Mary, the maiden is portrayed more like the first woman, Eve. It is the appearance of the maiden in the tapestries that signals the death of the unicorn, and while more than 100 species of plants are depicted in the entire tapestry series, the apple tree present in the unicorn is captured by the maiden seems especially significant, reminiscent of the apple in the Garden of Eden that harbingered the fall of man and the introduction of sin onto the once perfect, eternal, and abundant earth. However, before we attribute pure malevolence to the maiden in the tapestries, we should try and decipher why she may have betrayed the unicorn, as well as her nurturing feminine nature. While women were associated with nature through their fertility and life-giving traits, their places in medieval society were the domestic spaces of their homes and villages, where nature itself was domesticated, welded in the shape of patriarchal culture. When women moved outside of these domestic spaces, they put themselves into a situation of risk. The pastures and forests of medieval Europe, while beautifully illustrated in the unicorn tapestries, were nevertheless vast, dangerous wildernesses for women and girls. In the same way that wild game were hunted by local poachers, who were great nobles and high churchmen, as well as peasants, criminals, and outlaws, so too were women who ventured into fields and forests alone. If women were not accompanied by men for protection in pastures and forests, they were stalked by male predators. Cases from medieval coroner's inquests reveal the stories of 7-year-old Agnes, the daughter of a John de Nevers, who was minding sheep in the fields when a man came upon her and violently threw her onto the ground in order to rape her, squeezing her so hard that blood issued from her mouth and nose. More famous medieval women were victimized by the wilderness as well. Joan of Arc's inquisitors suggested that she put her virginity at risk by going to the fields to tend sheep. And Marjorie Kemp, who unlike more picturesque victims of sexual violence, was mature and middle-aged during her travels and religious pilgrimages, was afraid to travel alone for fear of being raped. The Maiden of the Unicorn Hunts, then, was decidedly groundbreaking. While the Maiden is one of the least physically powerful creatures in The Unicorn is Captured by the Maiden and the Tapestry series as a whole, she is not powerless. And while the hunter spears counter the unicorn's sharp horn, the Maiden needs no weapon to subdue the unicorn, save for her virtue and purity, which, paradoxically, often made her the vulnerable and objectified target of men and hunters. The Maiden, who must understand the mythological ferociousness of the unicorn just as well as the armed male hunters, is fearless before the creature, almost as if she commands an inexorable unreality, a dream whereby the potential for violence against her, especially gendered violence, can be easily telepathically manipulated. In the forest where the unicorn hunt takes place, woman is not the object of violence, either of the unicorn or the gang of hunters, but rather a willing participant in it. So perhaps the Maiden's complicity in the capture of the unicorn is a survival mechanism. Maybe it is the projection of her own fears onto the body of another creature, outnumbered and outwitted by man. Regardless, the Maiden lives, surrounded as she is by violent, spear-wielding men, as fearsome and magical in her survival among those male brutes as the mystical unicorn. And so does the unicorn, survive, that is. In the final, most iconic tapestry in the series, The Unicorn in Captivity, the creature is resurrected, whole, alive. The Wild Woman with Unicorn tapestry, also from the late Middle Ages, created between 1500 and 1510 CE, similarly imagined a sort of idyllic feminine utopia. While there were a plethora of wild woman archetypes in the Middle Ages, the wild woman portrayed in the Wild Woman with Unicorn tapestry is most akin to the innocent wild woman. This woman, according to medieval folklore, enjoys the company of her wild family and indulges in the forest and its pleasures. With her long, flowy hair resembling a horse's or lion's mane, and her body covered in vibrant blue hair except for her exposed breast, this maiden is different from the unassuming, richly dressed maiden of the Unicorn tapestries. There also seems to be an overt familial connection between the wild woman and the unicorn. The woman appears to have been suckling the unicorn as she would her own small offspring, and the two share a small but curious phenotypic resemblance. Their hair is a similar shade of dirty blonde. Despite their obvious differences, the maiden in both the Unicorn tapestries and the Wild Woman with Unicorn tapestry wield a similar power, that is, carving a safe space for themselves in the wilderness. However, unlike the maiden of the Unicorn tapestries, the woman in the Wild Woman with Unicorn tapestry is not a participant in patriarchal violence. She is maternal, seductive, and powerful, and the unicorn, importantly, is protected and at peace. Modern interpretations of the unicorn mythos further the idealism of the Wild Woman with Unicorn tapestry. Take, for example, the poem Unicorn, published in the 1960s by prolific British writer Angela Carter, who reimagined myths, fairy tales, and femininity in her work. While the poem contemplates some dark themes, including possession, the objectification of young women and girls as sex objects, and the undertones of bestiality inherent in the unicorn mythos, it ultimately emphasizes the luxurious beauty and quiet fierceness of both the unicorn and the maiden, contrasting them against men who are at once vile hunters, solicitors, and prey, deluded and naive in their lust and gluttony. The maiden, surrounded by innocent and fragile leaves dripping with last night's rain, gleams with a cold lunar brilliance, and the unicorn runs through the woods, ripping the bulging belly of the dark, its horns sprouting, swelling, blooming in all its glory. And though the unicorn is himself somewhat menacing, inexorably drawn by the fragrance of the young girl's moist garden plot, it is the hunters who, in the poem, are no more than strip club cuckolds cramped in cabinet de voyeur, massaging their trembling buttocks, who truly threaten the young maiden, sacrificing the girl, her body, virginity, and sexual autonomy, to the powerful enchanted unicorn for their own sadistic pleasure. The poem ends rather inconclusively. They, the hunters, sharpen their knives, whisper to her, "You can put your knickers back on in a minute, dear." But the reader is left with a sense that the young girl will not be exploited by the hunters. While they sharpen their knives, she sharpens her teeth, hiding too the claws in her red fingertips. In some particularly striking lines from the poem, the girl sings, "You think you are possessing me, but I've got my teeth in you." In Unicorn, the maiden, like the mystical unicorn, possesses an animal ferocity beneath her innocent, unassuming, and complicit exterior. While she, like the unicorn in medieval unicorn mythos, is hunted and chased by men, she is unafraid, eager even. Her femininity is not a weakness, but an armory, concealed, her sharp teeth and claws, like the alicorn, powerful and purifying. That is, they purify the sin of patriarchy. In the poem, lust and its accompanying gendered violence. In Unicorn, the maiden, like the forest-dwelling unicorn, is a fabulous beast. The Last Unicorn from 1982, directed by author Rankin Jr. and Lance Bass, further exposes the gendered power imbalances in the unicorn mythos by introducing a female unicorn. The last unicorn, nameless, lords over the forest, protecting smaller forest animals from hunters. While the unicorn is powerful in her woodland home, she and her race are nevertheless subject to victimization, potential victimization, and domestication by roaming hunters and menacing outlaws, and literal victimization by King Haggard and the Red Bull, who has captured all unicorns but the titular last and trapped them in the sea. The victimization of the unicorn mirrors that of her second self, Lady Amalthea, who is plagued by her imminent mortality and lured into purposeless mundanity as Prince Lear's love interest. In Lady Amalthea, the shared oppression of women and unicorns converge. The maiden in the film, Molly Grew, similar to the woman in the Wild Woman with Unicorn tapestry, defies convention. Molly, initially confined to a life of drudgery among her husband, Captain Cully, and his band of outlaws, is neither young, chaste, nor particularly virtuous or beautiful. And yet, unlike so many of the hunters in the film, she can see the unicorn for what she really is in all of her horned majesty. She, Molly Grew, is a true Virgin Mary figure, not only in her maternal impulses, but in her redemptive power. In fact, upon Molly discovering the last unicorn incarnated, the former cradles the fragile creature in her arms, a scene resembling Michelangelo's high Renaissance sculpture, Pieta, where a massive Mary, exuding strength and sorrow, cradles the smaller, tortured body of Jesus. In the last unicorn, the female body is simultaneously strong and weak. The woman suffers and simultaneously saves herself. Molly reminds Lady Amalthea of her divine nature and convinces her to abandon the human world and her mortal body to save her species. This magic, the magic of redemption, is present in even the lowliest of women. And of course, the film ends happily. Amalthea is transformed again into an immortal unicorn and ultimately saves her species and Molly Grew. Finally, Death of a Unicorn from 2025, directed by Alex Scharfman, depicts nature's triumphant revenge against man. It continues the story of the unicorn tapestries, whereby after the unicorn is led to the castle, in this film owned by wealthy philanthropist the Leopolds, whose name perhaps alludes to King Leopold II of Belgium, who in the 19th century cultivated his reputation as a humanitarian while simultaneously committing genocide in the Congo to establish a rubber empire. It is dissected, abstracted, and exploited for its horn's magical powers. The horn cures Ridley's acne, her father Eliot's sight and allergies, and the Leopold patriarch's atrophying illness. Except that this unicorn hunt does not end with the unicorn's death. The film transports us into a reality guided by ancient unicorn mythos, whereby unicorns were lured by hunters cornering their offspring. The kid unicorn, exploited by the Leopolds and their scientists, is avenged by its parents, black unicorns fearsome with their sharp lion's teeth and towering frames, looming constantly over their human antagonists. The film plays with the idea of predation, with the Leopolds hunting the unicorns, who they fear, and the unicorns hunting them. The unicorns in the film fulfill a hidden prophecy, a cautionary tale for man, foretold by the historically lost pieces of the unicorn is captured by the maiden tapestry, which the film imagines as gruesome and bloody. In this lost tapestry, the unicorn, in his search for the maiden, kills the hunters in its path, impaling and disemboweling them, abstracting them from their human wholeness. Like the fictional tapestry, the unicorns in this film do the same, except this time it is not the maiden they are searching for, but one of their own. This is not to say that the maiden in the film is not important. With her chopped black hair, nose-piercing, and rebellious attitude, Ridley, the atypical maiden played by Jenna Ortega, refuses to be her father's, who works as VP of Ethics and Compliance for the Leopolds, prop, or to be complicit in the family scheme to sell alcorn dust at predatory prices for the sick and wealthy. She is stubborn, loud, and hysterical. The unicorns bow to her. In the end, Ridley reunites the unicorns with their offspring, who they resurrect. The unicorns, in an act of forgiveness and maybe gratitude, also resurrect Ridley's dad, killed by the young Leopold. Their relationship is mutually beneficial, redemptive, defying the laws of mortality and reality. The world in which the story of Ridley and the unicorns is set is not magical. It is capitalist and predatory, full of sickness, death, and injustice. Until there are unicorns, of course, whose wrath is like that of the Old Testament God, destructive and purifying. Through death and the ferocious revenge of the unicorns, the world is made new. All of this to say that modern progressive retellings of the medieval unicorn mythos herald a future in which women in nature reclaim their power, which is magical and ancient, courageous and just. In one of the final scenes in Death of a unicorn, hauntingly big, stalks the claustrophobic halls of the Leopold's castle, menacingly, its horn grazing the arched ceilings. And I was afraid, but also eager. This is a metaphor for something. I will conclude with this, that unicorns are the future, and it is time that we women believe in them again, the way they have always believed in us, the way they have searched for us relentlessly and found us, there alone in the forest.